A question that comes up a lot here on the Check a Pro radio show is how do I know what size air conditioning unit I need for my home? I hear 3 ton, 5 ton. I hear, multi-stage this and yada, yada, yada. How do I know? Well, you got to call an air conditioning expert. I've asked Brandon Day to join me from Daycool Heating and Air. Hey, Brandon, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, how are you?
I am living the dream. Thank you so much. Okay, simple question, which
Okay.
may not be so simple, is what size air conditioning unit do I need? How do you answer that question?
Uh, it's not straightforward. There's so many variables. Um, no house is the same, no home's the same, no building's the same. Depending on how many square foot your home is, just off of basic math is not going to require the same size unit for everything. Newer homes are so well insulated and sealed. You have certain times that it's best to put a variable speed piece of equipment,
Mm.
and that sometimes that wouldn't save you any money, or depending on what your value point or your how much money you're wanting to spend on something will dictate variable speed stuff, which would dictate size.
Yeah, one of the misconceptions is you know what? I'll get the biggest one I can afford because that's going to cool my home better. Now, you and I know better. You're going to have all kinds of problems. One of it is probably high humidity in your home. Explain why it's so important to size that AC unit.
Well, you got to essentially think of it this way: you're trying to remove droplets of water out of the air in our climate. That's the main concern. Um, if you have a unit that's running too short of amount of time because it got the temperature right in there, humidity still floating around the air, but it's satisfied temp, the unit's going to shut off because it's so big. It's like having a big block motor in a import little car that's too much for something it doesn't need.
Yeah,
It
with
can't utilize. It can't utilize
yeah, with brakes that aren't good enough on that small
it.
car,
Yeah,
right?
right, right. That's a better analogy.
Yeah.
But so you want something that's going to run to the right temperature, and like when you size a piece of equipment, you have a temperature it has to be able to achieve and hold per code by where you live, and that you have to. So when you're doing all the math, you have to do it to that set point, which dictates. There's so many scientific numbers that go into it, but that's the gist of it. You want it to run a little longer, so people don't understand that a lot of times.
Yeah, so it's not like an engine because we have seen vehicles, trucks and cars where someone will put in a big engine and yes, that car will go faster, but you have to modify some other things. When it comes to your air conditioning system, and I know this, it's really critical. It has to be sized properly, and there is mathematical formulas that you have to put into place. Something else that people don't understand either, Brandon, is that why can't I keep my house cool in the summertime when I have 35 people in it for a party? Because it's not
Oh yeah,
designed, it's not designed for that, right? It's designed for
right.
so many inhabitants. So what happens? It's all that body heat, right?
Yep. Well, it's the same idea as people that have 50 computers in a house that's designed for one, or the code. We'll say code, but if you're talking about whatever, um, it's designed for normal living conditions. And
Hmm.
if you're going to have an event at your house once a year, obviously you wouldn't want to size something too big just because you're having an event one time. Whereas a church would be sized different for the same
Yep.
square footage as it would if it was a home. It would be the church was going to require more uh, heat removal, humidity removal, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely. So to, put this into simple terms, everybody, let's say that you have a 5 bedroom house and you have 3 kids and they all leave home because they're grown up. Your house may start to feel more comfortable now, not just because the kids are gone, but because there's less body heat in the house, right? Because the equipment hasn't changed, but there's less things putting off heat, not to mention there's less light bulbs on, less TVs, less computers. And it really comes down to it being that scientific. It can be that sensitive. So you need to call Brandon and his team out to actually run the numbers. Now, generally what happens if your house was built correctly, everything was installed and sized correctly. But Brandon, another question here. Have you been to a home that was built by a builder where the AC systems were not sized right to begin with and you had to make a change?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, another thing to take into account as well is when equipment, when a home is of some age, it deteriorates. All the building materials of R value, which is insulating value, all that matters. House gets expands and contracts as it heat. So you have to account for air loss when the wind blow. You know, a house becomes leaky. We do blower door test where we
Yep.
can see how leaky a home is. We can seal a home. We can do the same thing with duct work, and that all matters. I mean, like people go, well, it's been leaking forever. It doesn't matter. Well, what's the point of having a box here with the trunk that's supposed to deliver it here if it's leaking all the way to where it's trying to get the air? And that's an easy thing to realize.
Yeah, it's like anything else, everybody. It's like a diet, it's like exercise. Just do the right things and everything will run much better. Brandon, thank you so much for joining me here today on the program. Much
Yeah.
appreciated.
Thanks for having me.